So I rolled 132, and I thought, what is that? It's the compound, which I mentioned yesterday in the last talk I did. And I thought, well, I mentioned it yesterday. I don't really need to talk about it very much. So I'll roll another one. And it was 5, which is a much more complex long tale about dreams I had. Dreams I had, not dreams like dreams I had while I was sleeping, but heart yearning desire from a young age to be kidnapped. And so these seem like two very different stories. So we're going to start with the compound because that's what I rolled first. And we will let it develop and see if there's space to tell the story about desiring to be kidnapped. I just got skies behind me. Skies behind me. What do we want? Let's have a juniper tree behind me. How's that? Sit on the ground with a juniper tree. Howdy. Hi, fellas. I'm going to tell a story right now about the compound. And of course, at any point you can ask any questions and I may ignore you or I may try to respond to what you're talking about. So, once upon a time, where does the story of the compound start? I wanted more than anything. No. Once upon a time, when I was a little kid, I would stare at the wallpaper. And I felt that there were beings in the wallpaper. This didn't seem like a big deal because when you're like 3 or 4 years old, it's hard to tell what's real and what's not real. I was one of those children that the world didn't make sense to me at all. Everything was very confusing. So, I would stare at the wallpaper when I was a little kid, and there were beings through the wallpaper that would talk to me. And I remember at a pretty young age, I really wanted to go be with them. This is probably another story in my list, but this is a good way to start the story about the compound. And at the age, I believe, of 5, my godfather had given me a set of keys because he was a locksmith, and my favorite color at that age was green. And one of the keys on this big ring of keys was green. And so as soon as he gave me this set of keys, I thought, oh, this is the key I can use to leave. And I can go be with my friends in the other dimension behind the wall. I don't even know how I thought of it, how I conceptualized it back then, but it was a certainty. And I think before we learn so many words, certainties are easier because we don't need to explain them to ourselves. We just know them. We don't need to rationalize them or justify them. We just know them. We're just like, oh, this is the way it is. Great. So I think it was just a few days after my birthday that I decided it was time to leave. And it wasn't necessarily like I want to die. It wasn't a suicide. It was just like I'm ready to leave Earth. I've had enough. I was 5 years old. I'm ready to leave Earth. I had enough. So I used this green key. Hola, ¿cómo está? I used this green key that my godfather had given to me, and I stuck it in a light, an electrical outlet, because of course that looked like a keyhole. I don't have a favorite color now. I like all colors, and my colors range through different reasons I want to be around them and with them, but I still love green, of course, but I don't really play favorites very well at this point in my life. Anyway, I took this green key and I put it in an electrical outlet with this idea that it would open the portal that would allow me to leave. And I do remember a gigantic lightning bolt throwing me across the room, and I hit the wall and passed out, but I woke up. I don't remember having any kind of near-death experience or talking to beings or something. But I do remember being thrown across the room, and when I opened my eyes, my mother and brother were looking down at me, and my mother was crying and panicking. And she said, "Why did you do that? Oh my God, I'm so glad you're safe, you're here." And I looked at her and I was like, why am I still here? And it made a really big impression on me because I felt trapped after that. See, maybe these two stories do fit together. I felt really trapped after that because I didn't understand until I was 5 years old and tried to leave that I couldn't leave this whirlwind body just because I chose to. And it felt really limiting and terrifying. Prison. So I felt like a confused child anyway, and then I grew up with this weird sensation of I'm living in a world that I do not have the choice of being in. I'm just stuck here. Okay, so let's start with 5 now. So my mother really loved this television show called Little House on the Prairie. And there was one episode I remember seeing where one of the girls got kidnapped. And this may not be actually Little House on the Prairie. It might have been that I conflated it with some after-school special. But it had some very strange imagery that maybe were supposed to depict abuse, like a nightmarish imagery of being kidnapped. And I remember once I realized that there was an option that some random person might steal me away, I was really intrigued by the subject. And, once you become aware of anything in the world, it tends to appear more. So I remember seeing on television there were other news reports about people being kidnapped, and an 8-year-old girl being stolen from a parking lot, and the family's looking for her, and the whole milk carton thing back in the days when there were children on milk cartons. As I aged with this inbuilt I want to escape feeling, and instead of escaping into heaven or escaping into another dimension where my friends are, I was like, well, maybe I could just escape this house and this family. So I really wanted to be kidnapped. And it was like a quiet desire. My mother was very scared, as many mothers are nowadays and starting back in the 80s, of her children being kidnapped. She would have dreams. I remember she ran into my bedroom once and woke me up, and she had woke from a dream that I had been kidnapped, and she was making sure I was safe. It's funny because I remember that dream better than she does. She told it to me, and I totally visualized it and internalized it. And it was a dream. It was a dream where these people had beckoned her into a van, or beckoned me into a van or something, because they needed help or something, and then they drove off with me, and she had an asthma attack, or I had an asthma attack or something. Anyway, when we moved into the new house when I was 10 years old, down the road, the first house I lived in was surrounded by cornfields in every direction, and the second house I lived in was kind of on a hill and further away than from other houses. There was more wheat fields around us. And around that age, we moved into the new house when I was 10, and so around the age of 12, when puberty hit me, I had a real big break from really wanting to accept the world that I was living in. It was the first time I was like, Christianity's insane, television's crazy, people are nuts. And I grew my hair out when I was 14. But around 13 or 14, I started becoming a night owl and staying up all night. I had my own room. I would just not go to bed. And my mother caught me once going out late at night. I would sneak out through the doors. Not the main front doors, but the back doors. She caught me once going out. And she's like, oh, honey, I don't want you going out at night. You might get kidnapped. And I was like, I'd like to get kidnapped. I was like a goth kid. And she was like, oh, but honey, you might get murdered or raped. And, I was a goth kid. I was like, that would be great. I mean, obviously I was gay and I never had much sex. And I was like, yeah, I want to have sex and I want to get, kidnapped. And I want to, maybe whoever will kidnap me, I'll have a better life than this one. It was really bred out of anger. And I started leaving the house late at night. And everybody would be asleep, and I would sneak downstairs and open the back doors and then walk through the dark. Now, I grew up way out in the cornfields and the farmlands of rural Indiana, north of Indianapolis, central Indiana. So there were no streetlights. So I would go out walking, and it would just be pitch black, and I'd look at the stars, and I'd walk on the streets. And again, there was this kind of background desire that someone would drive up in a car and ask me to get in and take me away. And that never happened. I did it for years. I would sneak out of the house and go walking. Eventually, I made friends with two boys who were neighbors, and they had been friends since they were young boys. But they lived near each other, about 2 miles away. So I'd often walk over to their house at night, and sometimes knock on their windows. You know, that romantic teenage thing of knocking on the windows of your friends, or you don't want to get caught by the parents. It's romantic to me. There's pop songs that talk about it. But as I became more of a goth kid, I'll tell this story short. Like I started having sex when I was 12 with another 12-year-old, and then when I was 13, I played with a 26-year-old. But then I fell in love with someone when I was 14, and he was 32, and that went on for like a year and a half. And when we broke up, I was just heartbroken, and I became a stoner. And I became a total goth, and I was very angry and just wished I were dead all the time. It was so dramatic. So I would walk on these dark roads at night, and instead of this feeling of wishing to be kidnapped, I had this feeling that I wished I'd get run over by a car. And I kept seeing this image of me laying down in the middle of the street. You know, it was very hilly. Not very hilly. It was pretty flat, but there were hillies. And I was like, I could just lay down where a car wouldn't see me. They'd just run over me. Oh, it feels terrible to say this right now. It feels terrible to say it. It feels terrible to feel it. But it was just how I felt. Like I so badly wanted to escape, and I felt so trapped. So then we'll forward. I guess at the age of around this same time, I decided I had to stop walking because I was like, I don't want to commit suicide, and I don't really want to die. I just don't want to be here. So I stopped walking late at night, and it was around this time that this friend who lived 2 miles away got a car. And we'd go have adventures. And right around the time we started having adventures, we skipped school one day and did acid. And the first time we did acid, or at least the first time I did acid, I think he had maybe done it once before, it didn't have any LSD in it. It was just like strychnine or something. None of us really tripped, and we all just got cramps and felt horrible. That's an important part of the story as a segue, though, because I eventually did do LSD with them again when I came back from England when I was 18, and had an amazing experience. I got to see the curve of the earth and the sky, and I got to understand the functions of desire, and that's probably in my list. I'm sure I'll tell this story more detailed later. But it opened up a world to me that I didn't really fully know how to navigate. And again, I never was somebody who did a lot of LSD. But when I ended up being, at that point, when I came back from England, I just ran away from Indiana. I spent some time driving around the Midwest and seeing Kentucky and Tennessee, the states nearby. I would just drive today. What am I going to do? I'm just going to drive over there and see what it looks like. And I eventually just started traveling the world. So this leads into me just like I'm traveling America, and people offer me to go to South Africa, people offer me to go back to Europe, and I just travel around. But I'm also experimenting with acid. In Tucson, I lived with this boy who lived 2 miles away from me. I don't want to say his name to give him anonymity. We'll just call him T. His name was T. We'll call him T. We'll call him Puckett. We'll call him Puckett. Puckett was living in Arizona at the time, and I went and lived with him. And it was at that point in time we started doing acid and mushroom. And this is not working now. The internet's being unhappy. We were doing acid and mushrooms and kind of whatever we could get our hands on. So that was not the healthiest thing, but we didn't do it a lot. And look at this boring background. Stable. So we were doing acid and mushrooms, and we were also doing meditation, and we never really got into spiritual practices back then, but I had already been introduced to yoga, so I was aware of feeling our connections through chakras, and I was definitely starting to have dimensional, fractional understandings of past lives, and what I later called frame stories, and that the ultimate truth of everything is just oneness or emptiness, depending on which way you want to look at it. However, between that truth and this truth that we're living in, whichever way you experience your version of reality, there are tons of frame stories, from the road. Thank you, Frank. And when I mean frame stories, I mean that like right outside of this, for a lot of people, is heaven and hell, and that's a frame story. It's not reality. It's not something you can touch, and it's not something you can experience, but it can greatly influence your life if you know about it. If you believe in heaven and hell, then you're like, oh, I have to be careful of falling into hell, or I want to get up to heaven. There's lots of other frame stories. And if you get into something like Hinduism or Buddhism, or I guess even Mormonism, and these are religions, because you can also make up your own frame stories. But if you get into things like that, you know that there's infinite worlds that you can live in, and infinite versions of yourself that can like basically Matryoshka doll back into the one God or the infinite emptiness. But there's like higher selves, and I don't just mean in an AA kind of way, but you know, you can have overtones, super egos, archangels that might be the archetype of the being that's manipulating, that's like kind of marionetting, puppeting this ego self that you're navigating this realm with. And I became kind of intimately in touch with this kind of truth, with this kind of fractal, multidimensional truth about the realm we're living in. You know, and if you look at quantum mechanics, I mean, I always love this like Leonard Susskind thing that I've been telling people about this lately because I'm in the West Coast and this kind of stuff goes over well here, but it's nice to link up with science. Leonard Susskind was talking about how, in his definition of the holographic universe, that, you know, through physics and math and stuff, they've been able to prove that on the edge of the universe, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you think of eternity stretching out forever, wherever the fuck the edge of the universe is, the exact same thing is happening as right here. Wherever you're looking at something, it's also happening at the edge of the universe, and mathematically they cannot tell which one is real and which one is a projection, assuming that both are not real at the same time. So eternity's a holograph, or this not eternity, finite reality we're living in is a holograph. The holographic universe. So one time, I'm doing a lot of, I'm not doing a lot. I'm doing meditation. I'm having conversations, which again, I probably talked about in another one of these talks. There's an Indian philosophy that talks about kind of a meditation technique, or it's not even an Indian thing. I guess Sufis talk about this as well, that a meditative or a spiritual practice is having conversations with your friends. And as a child, that was like my biggest form of going to church, my biggest form of spiritual study, my biggest form of magic was conversation with my friends, which isn't in part what I'm doing with these videos, that like I'm talking to you as if you were my best friends and that you understand everything I'm saying. But I'm also being pedantic and trying to explain all the intricate details for those of you who might actually be able to follow this wonderful rambling. So we'd have lots of conversations, and so in that process we had developed an intricate communication system that wasn't just based on words. It was connecting through lots of the media, the books, the music, the movies that we were digesting. And some of those things were really about multidimensional experiences and otherworldly experiences. So I wish I could remember the first time this happened, but I know it was in Tucson. One time I was on acid and I fell out of this version of reality at the peak of the experience and fell into this room that I came to call the compound. When I say a room, it went on infinitely, but it could also just be small, kind of like going into a smart car or a Fiat. It looks so little from the outside, but you get inside and it's roomy and spacious. When I would go into this room, I felt like it was a nexus of worlds, a place where everything was knowable, everything was understandable. So when I first started doing what people call psychedelics or entheogens, when I first started doing acid, I thought it was supposed to be like a fun party drug thing, but for me it just became this thing where I had to talk to God and understand reality, and I didn't believe in God when I first started doing LSD, so it was really frustrating to have to like untangle these knots of Jesus and Yahweh and Kyrie eleison, and get into more of an infinite ultimate truth that like synced up with my science and art that I was interested in at the time and the philosophies. But I came to this, when I would do acid, I noticed that if I asked any question, I could find an answer to it. It didn't necessarily mean that it was true, but it felt true. It resonated as true. And I could keep asking the question, and not necessarily in words, but in feeling and actuality and being, and kind of navigate through time and space to understand the truth of the curiosity I was holding. But it's for many years, either through meditation or doing some kind of drug, being it just tobacco and LSD or mushrooms or something, I would fall into this place that seemed like a room where seemed like there were just a few people, and I knew all of them. And I wasn't Dominic. I was again kind of telescoping or fractaling or matryoshka dolling. However, it was like a folding back into another being that was a higher self. And I was very aware that this being that I know of as Dominic wasn't any one of these beings, but was a mixture of a few of them. And then there were others in the room that wasn't in this being at all, but we were all friends. And so Pocket and this girl, there was a triumvirate I had between Pocket and this girl. What do I call her? I wonder if that was his pet name for himself. I wonder if he gave her a pet name. I don't give people pet names very often. Well, I'll just call her Michelle. So Pocket and Michelle. When I was in these kind of states, I could recognize these archetypes, the mixtures of them that were in Pocket and Michelle. And there was a similar strata of me. One of the same archetypes that made this being up also made them up, but then they also had different archetypes in them. So they shared things uniquely between the two of them, just as I shared things uniquely between each of them, and then we all had being in common. And on one level, we were just some dumb kids from Indiana trying to fucking figure out how to be happy, although we made each other so unhappy. And the desires we had and the drugs we did and the suffering we did was so self-imposed. On another level, we were the architects of reality. And they're kind of the ones that made me want to be a writer. They made me want to be a storyteller. I mean, it might have been something I innately had, but they're the ones that brought it out in me. And to me, I wasn't so interested in telling entertaining stories as I was being an author of reality, like really learning how to change the shape of existence. I mean, this was like the big deal for me at this age. Again, what age was I? This is like 19. Yeah, 18, 19, 20, because at 21 I decided to stop for a while. I may tell that later. I'll tell that now. Anyway, so being in the compound was this place that I could access all of the knowledge I needed. I could clearly see the architecture and the structure of not just this reality, but any reality I could perceive. And of course, because I was going into the compound through the doorway of Dominic, Dominic has a very limited perception, especially when he was 20, 19. So there was very little ways that I could navigate to other worlds. I mean, even though I do believe they exist, I still at this point don't navigate to them. I don't really know how to get there. This ego sense of self, it's not necessary. This ego sense of self is having this experience in this place. I think there are ants in my pants. I'm sitting on the ground behind a juniper tree in the shade. I guess that's the main interest of the compound to me, is the story of wanting to escape and go be with my friends in some other dimension, and enacting it in desperate heart gestures, action gestures, yearnings, and then eventually combining some sort of innate spirituality, detritus of religious upbringing, and psychedelic exploration and philosophical exploration to you could say either, building psychotic, always a pathological term, a psychotic temple, or or just a place to look at reality from. I mean, a lot of times we can't see our own lives clearly, and that's what we need friends for, to see us from the outside and be like, no, you're actually beautiful and wise. I was talking to a friend yesterday who called for help. I love it. There's, from doing these videos right now, and a guy that I've known through the ferries for years and ended up spending some time with earlier this year, just called for a teaching. He was like, oh, I didn't expect to get a teaching. I talked with him for like an hour and a half. And he was like, but this is really what I wanted, so I'm so grateful. But one of the things I said to him, that when I was younger, I just wanted to die. I was so unhappy. And so it's hard for me to tell, like when people see me and they're all white lighty and they're just like, you're such an inspiring person. You're just so, you're so open-hearted and you're just like love. And I'm like, oh, and they're like, how did you get to be like this? And I'm like, well, I hated myself and wanted to die. And they're like, what? I threw myself at the world, not wanting to commit suicide, hoping that it would destroy me. And instead it caught me and it picked me up and it brushed me off and it took care of me and it showed me that the world was really kind and there was tons of good people in it and that it taught me how to love. And, the world just kept telling me that I was wise and beautiful and helpful and useful and necessary and grateful. And I just, I didn't believe it for a long time, but eventually I was like, okay. And it just proved it to me over and over and over, and until I could just stop doubting it and, just live from that truth. And I didn't feel like I needed to escape it so much. I didn't feel like I needed to get out of it. So it's very strange at this, right now I just escaped my life. Go run to the West Coast. I was very aware that that was the motivation. I need to get the fuck out of here. New York is not fitting. It doesn't feel good. And so I'm just having a wander through the West Coast now. And it was interesting to have a nice place to stay in Portland for 2 weeks, but I was very unhappy being alone. And now I'm staying with a friend, and different people pass through here every day. Random people just come and stay and come and talk, and then we have adventures, we have conversations. That seems so much healthier. Are you taking off?
I have a sound healing to assist with.
Oh, great.
From 7 to 9 is when it is. It's near Berryville at the yoga studio across the street.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Enjoy.
I'll be back later.
You feeling better?
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot better.
Good.
Yeah.
You sniff a little.
See you in a bit.
See ya. Why not? Yeah, but it's still useful to have a place to, it may be a place inside of yourself or a place inside of myself, a place inside of ourselves to feel like we can have perspective on reality, to not be caught up in the stories. Like, what if none of this is true? What if this is all a metaphor for something? What is what's the important, what is the truth that permeates all of this? How do you get the perspective that you can see life clearly outside of yourself and outside of the stories you believe, outside of your ego? It's very tricky. So this compound thing was the way for me. This idea of the compound, of being able to go into a place where I felt everything was knowable if I just stayed with it, not even asking the right questions. There were no right questions, just any question that was asked. I was able to go into a truth to understand it. And connecting back with the second story, it's very similar to this, that I still have these desires, of course, at times to oh, no Burning Man ticket has manifested yet. A friend asked me who's going to Burning Man. Does anybody have a free Burning Man ticket to give away? Yeah, but not needing to feel so much like I need to be kidnapped or I need to kidnap myself. That did manifest pretty funny at the beginning of 2007. Somebody contacted me and said, I want to boy-nap you from your life. And again, I felt I had let all that go, and it was so interesting to see it bubble up. that the universe would just come out of nowhere and be like, yeah, I want to kidnap you from your life. But he said boy nap, not kidnap. Yeah. And I haven't been to the compound, like feeling like I was in the compound with these archetypes and these portals of understanding, as I described it yesterday. There were like at one point, the last time I was in there were terminals. Everybody was like working at terminals, and they could like fractal through the terminals into different dimensions. So that's. But it was basically like, instead of asking someone for the answer, you just interact with reality directly and know it all, and put yourself in the right place. Spiritual technologies. I think that's probably enough for now. Does anybody have any questions? My friend Frank is trying to have a practical conversation with me. He says, Plumpy, do you believe Plumpy has a ticket he wants to get rid of, Frank? Is that what you're saying? So for the rest of you, if anybody's listening or watches this all the way through, I'm intending to do a interview video with a friend tomorrow. The friend I'm staying with, I'm going to interview him about a couple things about his life, and he's going to interview me about a couple things about my life. And it's not going to be a live video. I think I'll record it offline in case I want to edit anything out of it. Yes, the portal of Jorge Clar. But I'll post that because I've been wanting to do interviews. So again, like, if any of you have, I guess, if you want a teaching, or at least you want to ask questions about things and wonder what my perceptions about them, I mean, I certainly, yes, he is a serial boy napper, this fella. I don't know if you know him, Frank. I won't say his name. I am wearing trousers, yes, Nick. And I love you too, Tom. Thank you. I haven't seen you in a very long time. Yeah, so if anybody wants to do any kind of interviews, we can do it. We can do it somehow. We can find ways to make it work. I think it would be fun. But tomorrow I'm going to do an interview with a real person that I'm with in real time. So that's, a different type of thing. And I probably will post it by the end of the evening tomorrow. I hope today I'm going to go walk in the mountains. We keep saying that's going to happen, but this house is such a cozy vortex. Oh yes, I'm going to go visit Plumpy in Sacramento, Frank. That is a goal. I will wrap my arms around him while he is still plump. And enjoy it. Alright, many starbursts to Jorge Clar. And many woofs to you, Frank Martin. And much love to you all. And I'm going to go explore. Be in nature and be with friends. And happy to have told some stories today. May all beings benefit. And no peace. Love you. Bye-bye.